based off of, I was able to look at partially, let me just say that so I'll be very clear. I was partially able to look at medical records from the hospital in comparison to what we received from the medical examiner's office, and few discrepancies that I saw. Um, and I don't know if there are discrepancies intentional, so I won't make that claim. But just the hospital records were very clear that when Tyrone came into the hospital, he was in a bad condition. From the very first doctor that saw him, this is based off of the hospital records, but from the very first doctor that saw him, he was concerned and almost immediately consulted a neurosurgeon because of the extent of his injuries. Within minutes of him arriving at the hospital, he had to be intubated, which means that he had to have a tube down his throat because he wasn't able to protect his airway. So when you're not able to protect your airway, that is an indication of a serious brain injury. So he wasn't able to protect his airway. He wasn't responsive. And again, his Glasgow coma score was almost at the very lowest. Even in the ambulance, he was at his very lowest. Almost, sorry, he was at a 4 when the lowest is a 3. So we're checking responsiveness, trying to see how we can get somebody to respond in that instance, just to see what your brain activity is. And he wasn't able to follow any commands. He wasn't able to wake up. He wasn't able to grab anybody's hands. He wasn't able to do anything. So, like I said, when he got to the hospital, almost immediately he had to be intubated. Almost immediately, the ER doc consulted neurosurgery. And when neurosurgery came in just a few minutes later, it wasn't an hour that he was there. Neurosurgery came and consulted and said that the injury was so severe that it was something that likely, even if they did an operation, it was unsurvivable. So we knew from the very beginning, within an hour of him arriving, that it was a serious injury, inoperable, and that the likelihood of him surviving was very low. So just the hospital records, from what I could see, were very clear that the story that was being told in regards to jumping from the car, rolling from the car, that story seemed to consistently change through the provider notes, as different modalities or different doctors from different specialties came and saw him. The story seemed to change from, okay, this may have happened that way, to, okay, we have some concerns because none of the injuries are matching what is being told. And there was some concern there. So I won't speak to the legal side of it, but from the medical standpoint, the doctors didn't feel like his injuries matched what was being said. And that was evident in their notes. From what could be described from the provider notes, and again, when medical professionals write notes, we are writing notes so that if we have to stand up in court, our notes are speaking for us as though we were in the room with the patient. So from the notes, it was very clear. The doctor's like, there's only one injury, and the injury was to the back of the head, and the other one was just an abrasion to the shoulder, to the left shoulder. There was nothing else of concern. So when we see the photos later, where you see the extent of his injury, or when the family saw the extent of his injury to his head, or when you see the autopsy report and you see all of these different injuries being described, a lot of those came as a result of that one singular injury. So when you see multiple blunt force trauma, is it likely that he was hit or beat about his head? Probably not. But one injury can cause diffuse injury or widespread injury. So I was telling, like I stated before, if Tyrone were getting out of the car, and again, the team believes that something happened inside of the car or as he was exiting the car that caused his ultimate demise. So what I firmly believe from a medical standpoint is that when he was getting out of the car, or when he was turning his head to exit the car, is when he might have been struck. And if you're turning, an injury will look different. A brain injury will look different if your head is straight at a standstill in position forward. It will look completely different than it would if you were turning your head while you were being struck. And so what I think happened was he was turning his head as he was being struck. Maybe he was looking over his shoulder to look back. Maybe he was turning his head to exit the car, whatever. But if you look at the autopsy reports, it says that his brainstem was torn. So the impact of being hit caused his brainstem to tear, which would have caused all those other injuries. So it would have caused, or all the other things that you saw on the surface. Most of his injury was internal, but you saw the external manifestation. So the black eyes, that's the indication of being struck in the back of the head, like a base injury. You saw the fractures on the side. Well, if his head is turning in motion, if you hit one place, I explained in previous live that our brain will fracture, our skull will fracture like glass. If you hit the glass in one spot, you might have like a big dent in that one spot, but you see all those small cracks and fractures going that start to spread. That's what happened to his head all the way around. So when he was struck at that one base injury, and then he would have had those fractures or those small little fractures go around. When you saw it says he had hemorrhaging. Well, that's just the small vessels are bursting. So then you see all the external stuff. His pressure was building because all those vessels were bursting, and all of that fluid didn't have anywhere to go. And that's why you would have saw they had to do the burr hole so he could have somewhere to drain all of that excess fluid. So the swelling, all that stuff is manifestation. I know someone had made mention of him having or the autopsy report, and other people had concerns about him having like an abrasion to the side of his mouth. Well, he was intubated, and we put the tubes that come out of the mouth, we either put those on the left or right, or we put it in the middle because we want to rotate to avoid those types of injuries. So if it wasn't rotated frequently, or if it was pressure on that area, you would have seen that. So when I say the discrepancy between the autopsy and the hospital records are clear. Like when he came in, he didn't have any injury. There was no diffuse, widespread injury anywhere. There was an injury to the base of his skull, to the back of his head, and there was a abrasion across his left shoulder. So when you get to the medical or the autopsy report, you start to see like those small things like scar here, scar here, scar here, scar here. But the autopsy report should be very thorough, and it wasn't. The autopsy report should be a walk-in record. So if the coroner never walked in, the medical examiner never walked into the courtroom, his record should be able to tell a complete story. And when you say scar, that could be any number of things. Was it old? Was it new? Was it scabbed? Was it this? Was it that? And so when you have the untrained eye looking at that type of report and you see all that things, it makes it look like the injuries were more, they were scattered all over his body. But on arrival to the hospital, from the very moment he arrived at the hospital, it was clear he only had 2 injuries. One was to the base of his skull, which caused that widespread neurological decline. And then he had just an abrasion across the left shoulder. And that was it.